So when I go watch the game, there's no more creativity, there's no more imagination. It's just that we have basically robots running up and down the court. You run to the three-point line, I run to the three-point line.
The algorithm has recently recommended a number of videos to me about the NBA basically falling apart, highlighted by former players talking about all the problems with today's game.
I think the imagination and the flair of the game is not the same.
I agree with you. Creativity is lost.
There's no more creativity, there's no more imagination.
Everybody's doing the same thing.
I will grant BJ that some players aren't falling over in the middle of key plays in suspense, but even then, I mean, D'Angelo Russell likes to practice air jumpers in the middle of playoff games, so maybe not much has changed over the years. Anyway, there are a number of themes in these videos that echo some dialogue around the state of the league right now, and while we won't cover everything here, there are a few big points to hit. First and foremost is that the game is a glorified three-point shooting contest. Secondly, largely because of that, everyone suddenly plays the same. And third, that all of this leads to a lack of creativity, making the product stale. Now, before we address these points, remember, none of this means you have to like one era better than another. To me, part of basketball's magic is that it flows and evolves over time. And on this channel, we've celebrated at least 7 different decades of the NBA. If I personally hear the first 3 notes of the NBA on NBC song, I turn into a teenager at a Taylor Swift concert. And yet, I actually think right now, we're looking at the highest quality basketball in NBA history. To compare some of these era differences, let's look at the first quarter of 3 different games. Game 3 of the 1993 NBA Finals, a 2009 showdown between the Lakers and Cavs, and a recent game between 4th place Denver and 9th place San Antonio. On the first play of our Michael Jordan game, the triangle offense parks Bill Cartwright right in the post. Horace Grant isn't a threat to shoot the 3, so his man can sag way off. And they end up with an empty corner pick and roll where Scottie Pippen takes a long 2. On the other end, Kevin Johnson dribbles around for a while Phoenix tries to post up 2 players in the same spot. The Bulls then send a double team, pretty much just for fun, and Dan Marley fires a great pass to Richard Dumas. So this was certainly a post-heavy era, where big men like Cartwright isolated, even with Jordan on the floor, and that meant fewer touches for stars, and it meant big men posting up clogged the lane for penetrating guards. Armstrong is free to drive here, but Grant runs to his defender instead of running to open space, and that allows the defense to reset. It also took a good amount of time to wait and set up these post plays where other defenders could relax while their assignments aren't a threat, and then MJ does his thing. The slower, more deliberate era of the 90s and 2000s is often lost among highlights, where they skip over all the incredibly repetitive, static non-happenings like this. And this clear-out back-down maneuver was considered so boring that it was outlawed for the health of the game. Here's another low-speed post-up, and notice that the Bulls don't front the post to deny the entry pass, because when Jordan's man crosses to the near side of the court, it was illegal defense for Jordan to stay near Barkley and roam. When Marley spaces outside the three-point line, Jordan then has to get above the foul line. You could only actually double-team the player with the ball like this, so it welcomed this very post-centric game, where most defenders stood firmly behind the post player, hoping to push the catch out instead of denying the catch. Again, these defenders can't roam over to help, so it's either a full-on double or a one-on-one game like this. Then the Suns walk it up the floor, and 17 seconds after that make, you'll never believe this, they throw it into the post just to look for a pass in the paint, and Jordan easily takes that from a big man who isn't really much of a skilled ball handler.
Everyone plays the same exact way.
There were 16 post-ups in this quarter, even setting up on the block after a pick and roll, because again, the spacing here is designed primarily for an isolation or a post-up. Let's jump to another quarter in 2009 between the two best regular season teams in the league, where the Lakers start off with a high post touch for Kobe Bryant, and he takes a long two. And down at the other end, the Cavs play off their center at the elbow, and Zydrunas Ilgauskas hands it to LeBron for another very long deuce. Now, you'll notice that this game is a little more spaced out than the 1993 one. Cleveland has two players behind the three-point line here, and they set the pick and roll behind the arc. Ilgauskas pops for three, but then walks into a two? That is our third long two in just 2 minutes. On the play before, Luke Walton actually bypassed a three for a shorter jumper from the mid-range. So a pattern from the 90s game and this game is that role players and stars are shooting long jumpers, but they're not quite long enough to be threes. The first quarter of our 93 finals game also featured a number of long twos, from both role players in spot-up situations like this and from the stars running pick and roll only to take that pull-up jumper just inside the three-point line. So even though the number of threes specifically has doubled since 2009, the change in overall outside shots is far less drastic. The earliest data we have in 1997 says that over half of all shots back then were inside 10 feet. But in 2009 and today, just under half of all those shots were from that distance. What's really changed is that mid-range attempts between 10 and 20 feet have been sliced in half in this era, and 15% of shots have been outsourced back behind the three-point line. So the major increase in three-point attempts is from all these long twos turning into slightly longer shots to pick up an extra point, or from really difficult mid-range shots being eliminated for most players and reserved mainly for high-end stars who can still make these jumpers. When people complain about three-pointers, they're mostly complaining about the shots being longer or converting at a slightly lower percentage than the long twos they've replaced. NBA teams shot 47% on all field goals in 1993. They shot 46% in 2009, and they shoot 47% today. So it's not like we're watching substantially more misses, despite the shots being longer.
And what we've always loved is competition. There's no competition when it's a three. It's a contest.
But it's not a contest in the sense that these shots are just longer versions of what we saw in the past. There's still either dynamic plays off the dribble or their catch and shoot chances, which used to be much shorter spot ups inside the line because the defenses weren't as mobile and the game was more cramped. So while everyone is focused on the number of threes at the end of possessions, today's game is actually different because of everything that's happening at the beginning of the possession.
I would say let's get back to where our best players are being creative again.
Way back in the day, players tried all kinds of wild stuff. We saw running hook shots for a while and one-handed Bob Cousy things, but those shots weren't that effective, so they were phased out. We certainly saw all kinds of shooting forms that individualized players quite a bit. Although wonky technique often led to mediocre percentages, so players have more standardized shooting motions today, partially because shooting from farther outside requires more power. So some quirkiness is gone, but the idea that the game itself has lost creativity doesn't hold up to basic investigation.
I mean, Magic Johnson, white chocolate. I mean, we don't see people pass the way J. Kidd did. Like, it's like unreal. Like, we don't see that type of creativity no more.
The best passer to maybe ever live is playing right now. We've done endless videos on Nikola Jokic's passing and creativity. The man doesn't even use his left hand sometimes. And we are basically in a golden age of passing. And while many players have learned a set of regimented pick and roll passes, which, by the way, are ridiculously impressive and difficult to defend, there's also a ton of flair and creativity on these passes, just like in any era. We have innovative ball handling today, just like in the past. Since modern players are allowed a gather step, they've started doing all kinds of wild stuff with their feet, like Euro stepping around players, or the Pinoy step, where they fake a shot or even a pass to stride into a layup. Most importantly, there's a ton of creativity in play calling, in offensive structure, and in the read and react decisions of all 10 players on the floor on nearly every play. Our sample quarter from today has a ton of creativity. That's a giant 6'10 person storming to the rim and scoring on a 7'4 guy, and his defender jumps at this ball fake because he's a lethal three-point shooter in this spot, and the lane is empty because of all the shooting on the court. The next time down, the Spurs pick and roll turns into a Victor Wembanyama mismatch, but they can't easily post him up because Russell Westbrook fronts while the backside help boxes him in.
How you switch a 5'11" guy on a 7'5" and expect him to be? I'm like, come on, man. I turn it off.
On the inbounds, the center drives it off the catch, collapses the defense, and sets up an open shot. And this kind of drive and kick was often limited to guards in prior generations, and back then the kick-out jumper was often an open 2 instead of the slightly harder 3. Today's big men do post up if they're good. Many of them shoot it from the outside like knockoff Larry Birds, and of course they cover a ton of the court defensively. So after the point guard sets up the center for a 47% 3, Wemby lunges to defend it, Jokic slaloms around the Lilliputian, and Wemby elasticurls the layup from behind. Then he goes and tracks down the rebound just to play some point guard, brings it up court, and he gets a screen for the deep pull-up 3, but centers also pass like point guards now.
I think Wembanyama is a guard or a small forward, which we don't want to see it.
Right.
We're trying to put this 7-11 alien into a box and say, nah, give me your feet. You're going to fit in this big man box.
When everyone is this skilled, everyone is dangerous. So by modern standards, this is just a defensive breakdown, but it's a breakdown because Chris Paul is deadly with a pick, so the Nuggets drop Jokic back to wall off any drive, which means Russell Westbrook is responsible for taking away the big man, popping out for 3, which leaves his teammate to defend 2 shooters at once, and one cuts back door, and that's 4 seconds of modern basketball. Whew. Remember, in our 93 game, the big men were not dangerous from the outside, so defenders could just sag way off and ignore them. Most of the offense in this game came inside 20 feet, so the defense rarely has to stretch to the perimeter. Even a shooter like Armstrong isn't dangerous here because he's thinking about feeding the post. And even when Phoenix badly botches this switch, BJ doesn't punish them with a 3 or even a high percentage 2 because the lane is completely jammed up and it's easier to post up near the rim than to dribble through traffic. Our 2009 game was slightly more complicated. There were more ball screens at the three-point line. The Lakers actually force Mo Williams to his weak hand, but they don't really care about Ilgauskas shooting. And more importantly, the other big can roam in the paint because Ben Wallace is a total non-threat. On the next play, the Cavs move a bunch, but not much materializes because these actions aren't very dangerous or hard to defend. Sasha Pavlovich isn't looking to shoot. It's easy to take away LeBron's cut here because the big man can help without worrying too much about Ilgauskas, and so they fall back on a side pick and roll for James, where the Lakers overload the side because there's no more illegal defense, and LeBron has to work miracles to score. If you're casually watching this modern play, You just see a really quick three and think it's a shooting contest. But it's all set up by the beginning of the possession. The ball handler's really dangerous turning the corner, so Christian Braun is ready to help to take away that middle drive, but then his man cuts to pull him out of position, so Brown's like, okay, I'll split the difference, but also there's a good shooter in the corner, so he tells his teammate to switch out. Meanwhile, Julian Strother is reading whether the roll man breaks free so he can help stop a layup, but the second he goes to help, it's a no-look pass to the wing and the good look. Because everyone is a threat, defenses are in constant panic mode, forced to cover more actions and ground than ever before in a coordinated dance that often goes unnoticed in real time. That looks like a bad pass, but it starts with defending a nasty Warriors action where Jamal Murray needs to contain the slip. Strother needs to defend the handoff, but when he gets back cut, Murray needs to help, which instantly triggers Brown to defend two players at once, and then Brown closes to Murray's man, Murray takes Brown's man, and now everyone's taken care of, and Peyton Watson defends the basket cut beautifully, and then his high-speed chess. And oh, by the way, the Spurs need to defend instantly, and the slightest breakdown leaves a marksman open.
Man, we gotta do a better job of looking through this new lens and glorifying the game, bro.
More skill creates more space, and that's amplified by the pace of today's game. We've done videos on this too, and on this play, it's 5 seconds until the Nuggets attack and punish a Spurs miscommunication. Two players aren't entirely clear on their matchups, and because today's defenders can't mindlessly sprint back to the paint, everyone is dangerous, and that is a great shot. Compare that to our 1993 quarter with multiple Chicago defenders back on the edge of the lane, and then Dan Marley just walks away from the post anyway, and it takes 12 seconds to post up Barkley, and even when they double, the other three defenders aren't challenged much. The 2009 era was even slower, again walking it up after a make and taking a while to entertain a possible post-up. And again, these actions aren't as stressful for defenses since they cover less ground and three-point shooting is less of a concern. And it takes a while just to get a double-teamed mid-ranger here. Look at how slow this possession is. And remember, none of this is curated. We're just looking at the first quarter of 3 random games from different eras. And it takes until 8 seconds are on the clock to get this ISO clear out. There are 2 bigs in the lane, and LeBron makes lemonade out of some very big lemons. Back in 93, the Bulls ran this same Warriors action we saw from the Spurs a second ago, and it's way easier to cover when the other defenders aren't freaking out about weak side shooters, so it's harder here to cut or drive into a crowded paint. In the old days, cramped spacing meant you could double team the post without really paying any tax because good shooters didn't have a perpetual green light, and the rebounders jockeying for position weren't hard to cover either. Today, defending a good post player is like solving a Rubik's Cube. There weren't many post-ups in this quarter, so I'm going to cheat and use a play from another game where Jokic backs down his man, the double comes, and it looks like everyone's covered, but this defender has to stay with one shooter. That leaves another shooter. Now a second defender needs to take that away, and so it's a 30-foot dart to the corner for a 40% three. That's the equivalent of a 60% 2, which is 2% better than Shaq's career field goal percentage, and that was the defense's 5th option on that play.
Every morning we had a shoot around to try to solve how the we going to stop Ewing? How are we going to stop Kevin Garnett?
Yeah.
How are we going to stop Michael Jordan and his triangle?
Well, none of those offenses were nearly as potent as today's offenses, which is why the entire league moved away from sticking 3 or 4 guys in the paint and banging for post-ups and rebounds.
In 2004, every practice started with how are we going to double team the post? And pick and roll was sort of looked as something that we had to go over, but it really wasn't a big deal. Like, we'll just play the pick and roll, but we really got to focus on the traps, guys.
Once those floodgates open, the game evolved from a post-dominant strategy into a pick-and-roll dominant strategy, where if you go under the pick, it's a problem. If you go over the pick, it's a problem. If you don't help, it's a problem. If you help, it's a problem. This is the built-in advantage of the sport, and paired with great ball skills in shooting, it changed everything. It turned most possessions into a complex chess match where if you just focus on the end of the play, it looks like another old repetitive 3. But there are actually a ton of critical split-second decisions made by players that influence those shots and have replaced static mid-rangers and post-ups to move 15% of attempts behind the line.
The strategies of the game, the offense, the way the offense are being run, it's just totally different. So I think the chess that we used to play in basketball, we don't play chess anymore. We just
count how many times the white shirts pass the ball here in this tricky experiment. So 1, 2, there's 3, keep counting. This is what today's NBA feels like, because it's so fast, so complex, that if you aren't up to speed on the latest strategies, you'll miss the giant gorilla in the room, or the curtain changing color. And so, if you describe a basketball game by the end of its possessions, a ton of long jumpers are probably less interesting than the mano-a-mano post-up battles of the old days, where a great isolationist could go to a counter and arc the ball over the defense. I'm cheating again because that's from later in the game. The last big thing we haven't addressed is that everyone plays the same. And it's true most teams are pick and roll heavy today, but they also used to be post heavy in the past.
So I agree that people their memories are playing tricks.
I think the memories are playing tricks.
It's always been a copycat league with just a few teams going against the grain. The Grizzlies don't use a ton of pick and rolls right now. Teams like the Cavs are on the cutting edge of the pick and roll offense. And if you have a big man like Jokic, your offense looks quite different than if you're, say, Trae Young's Hawks. There may have been more diverse periods in NBA history, but this type of follow the leader style is nothing new. And since it's producing the most unguardable offense we've ever seen, forcing the most complex defensive reactions we've ever seen, we are looking at an unprecedented era of complexity. And so, depending on your perspective, that's either a problem or it's the best basketball that's ever been played. Our latest collaboration with the NBA is on the complex, cutting-edge spacing tactics that teams are using. I'll link to that below with other videos on the evolution of the game. Our last video on the Thunder also looked at the complexity from the defensive side of the ball. As always, you can support us at patreon.com/thinkingbasketball or by becoming a YouTube member. Otherwise, thanks for watching to the end, and I hope you are having a great day.